Okay, so happy Sabbath, everybody. It is a privilege, as always, to be able to spend some time standing in one spot and talking to people for about 40 to 50 minutes about really amazing things that God has shown us in His Word. And I like to view myself as just a random guy that gets to open up his Bible and bring up a couple things for us to remember. But for today, I think it would be a good idea if we talk about spiritual warfare. And specifically, today, I want to talk about how Satan works. I want to talk about how he tries to get us, how he tries to mess with us, tries to take away our faith. So many different things Satan will try to do to you. And how does he assess threat levels? How does he? What are his methods? Why do they matter? And what can be done to not be a victim of these things? And so I'd like to start right away at the beginning where we first see Satan, and that's in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. And of course, we all know this area. It's probably one of the most quoted passages that you'll find amongst, in the Sabbath School Quarterlies. You'll always see this somewhere along the way, if you're looking at quarterly just about. And it's always talking about, of course, the serpent, the man, the woman, that kind of stuff. And I really want to focus on what the serpent is saying here, really dissect this carefully so that we can begin to understand who we're dealing with here. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, actually, before that first thing, right, we learn he's very subtle. He's not upfront about things. He isn't honest upfront, telling you exactly how it is. He's very tricky, very flexible, very able to get into small cracks into things. That's kind of how he is. And he said unto the woman, yeah, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? So the first thing he does is ask a question. Isn't that right? Now, questions are not a bad thing to ask, are they? I mean, I just asked you a question right now, right? Was it a bad thing for me to ask you that question? No. Questions aren't always a bad thing, but sometimes, it might invite something. So notice something here, too. God told Eve, you can't eat one of the fruits off of one of the trees, right? Only one tree is bad. All the other, how many countless trees are good trees? There's only the one bad tree. So Satan turns that around and says, yeah, did God say you're not allowed to eat any of the trees? So now it goes into, what is Satan doing here, right? He's misrepresenting God right off the get-go from the first question. Right away, he's starting to try to make it sound like God is saying something he really isn't saying, right? And this is very interesting because, God is very honest in when he says something to you. He's not trying to trick you or have a second, God, yes, if you come to me, I'm not going to cast you out. But actually, secretly, if you do come to me, I'm going to cast you out, Satan is very tricky like that. He wants to make it sound like God has bipolar disorder or something like that, and he doesn't. So he already misconstrues God's command right there, which is something he loves to do. And the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. And so she understood God correctly there. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die. So now he's lying, right? And that's not even the worst part of this. It's actually verse 5 where the worst part happens. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So what is Satan doing there? He's saying, you know what? Yeah, God told you that, but actually, this is his intention. He wants you to think that his intention is this, but actually, he's trying to hold you back. He's trying to stop you from becoming gods. He's afraid of competition. He doesn't want anybody else to try to compete against him. He'll be jealous of you. He will, and these are all the kinds of insinuations we're dealing with here. So right off the bat, he wants to make God look as selfish and as bad as he possibly can. So we learn a lot from this. And like I said before, he accuses and misrepresents God's character, very much so here. And he's tempting. He wants them to commit the sin and eat the fruit. Now, I won't get into the why right there because the text it doesn't say why he wants it so bad. So I'll leave that for later. But suffice it to say that he's definitely fighting against God here. He's definitely trying to do everything he can to make God look different than he actually is. Very important. It's very much in his playbook to do that. So, as we go through the verses, you're probably thinking to yourselves, yeah, Tony's going to go over this one. He'll probably talk about Job, and he'll talk about when Jesus is tempted. But I'm happy to inform you that there's many more times in the Bible where Satan's involved, and so there may be a few ones that you weren't expecting to come up. So it's not going to be as predictable as you might think. So I'd like to go to one of these unpredictable parts of the Bible. I want to go to 1 Chronicles chapter 21. And we'll start in verse 1. I have to be mindful of time because I think that I have a lot of content here and I have to go through it in an efficient manner. So, 1 Chronicles 21, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. And then I'm going to compare it to another text. And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. So, interesting. Satan is going against Israel right now, which is very interesting because Israel is just a little tiny country in the world, right? It's not like, even in these times, it wasn't. I mean, I guess under King David, it was fairly big and important, sort of. But he always seems to go after Israel more than anybody else. If you look at the history of Jerusalem, it got destroyed, I believe, over 20 times. No city can claim to have that kind of history as far as I know. That's pretty amazing. So I'll start with verse 2 now. And David said to Joab and to the rulers of the people, "Go number Israel from Beersheba even to Dan, and bring the number of them to me that I may know it." And Joab answered, "The Lord make his people 100 times so many more as they be, but my lord the king, are they not all my lord's servants? Why then doth my lord require this thing?" Now notice Joab understands something here. Why will he be a cause of trespass to Israel? So here's a question. Is it a sin to take a census? Well, it's a tricky question because here it was. Why was it a sin here? We take a census every 10 years here in America. Are we sinning? I guess it kind of depends, right? Because what's David doing here? He's starting to put his confidence in numbers. Because why else would he care about how many people he has? If he only had 300 like Gideon did, he'd be just fine. He'd be just fine as long as God is with him. Numbers aren't so important. It's whether God's with you or not that really matters in anything you do, right? So why is David so worried about how many people he has? There's pride in his heart. There's this feeling of accomplishment that's there that shouldn't be there, I believe. Now, let's go to 2 Samuel 24, verses 1 through 3, and we're going to find something very interesting here. So this is actually the same account, same event, but there's a very important detail that's different here. Again, 2 Samuel 24, verses 1 through 3. So, and again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, "Go number Israel and Judah." So wait a second. Did Satan cause David to do it, or did God cause David to do it? Which one is it? Well, obviously, we believe that all of the Bible is true, so the answer is they both did. But how can God and Satan work together? Well, it's not that they work together. Our next text that we're going to go to after I finish explaining this part up is going to be Job, where then it becomes obvious. But Satan requests God to do things to people. And there's a Bible text which says, "The curse causeless shall not come." So when you put everything together, it seems pretty clear to me that God is mad at Israel over something. I don't know what the issue was that they had gotten themselves into. They were not living completely right. Something was wrong. And he was mad at Israel over something. And so Satan, Satan was the one who instigated the thing, I believe. And God was willing to allow it to happen because justice had to be done. And so when you read further from this story, you learn that a lot of people in Israel died because of that census. And you probably asked the question, well, how is it fair for those people to die? And my answer would be that uh, I believe God knew the people that were going to die and what the issues were. And so, kind of like Sodom and Gomorrah, if there were even 10 righteous, it wouldn't have been destroyed, kind of thing. So, I'm going to leave, and there's some things God's going to explain more fully too once we get to the resurrection. So, I'm not going to give you an in depth thing on this. I'm just going to say that God has his reasons for doing some of these things that he does. And I trust him. And I believe that that's the thing to do. I believe God will protect his people. So, anyway, I'm going to leave that there for now and go right to Job chapter 1, which is something you were probably expecting me to do. So, we'll do Job chapter 1, and we'll start with verse 6. And this is a very important book for understanding Satan and his tricks, what he does to people. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord, and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And that's actually a pretty arrogant thing to say in a kind of a way. It's almost like he's saying, yeah, I'm just strutting on the earth. I'm enjoying my kingdom I've gotten from Adam. I'm doing great. It's wonderful. Thank you for asking. And of course, the Lord, he's taking a little jab at the Lord here, right? He's being clever. And then verse 8, the Lord's kind of being clever back. He's like, and the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? So, wait a second, right? Satan's supposed to be king of earth here. It's supposed to be his kingdom. Who's this guy named Job who's not obeying Satan and doing what he wants him to do? This Job guy's standing out. God sees it, and then God asks him the question, have you considered Job? And we're going to find out if Satan has been thinking about Job or not in the very next verse. Verse 9, Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? So he has been thinking about Job quite a bit, actually. Verse 10, Hast not thou made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. And we know what happens after this. It's ridiculously bad. It's a ridiculously bad day for Job. I mean, everything that could go wrong goes wrong. It's obviously supernatural. There's no possible way these things could just coincidentally happen to Job. He loses everything. His family, all his children die. All his stuff is gone. Everything's taken from him instantly. All the servants come and tell him one after the other after the other. It's awful. It's terrible. So we learn a lot here. So going back to verse 10, Satan's accusation to God is, well, look, you're bribing Job in order to love you. Job doesn't really care about you. He only loves you because of what you've given him. That's the only reason why Job cares about you. And I'm sure he uses this accusation to any of God's people today. Well, yeah, look at what you've done for this guy. He lives a much better life. She lives a much better life than those who don't have you do. You've bribed them. You've bought their love. So they don't really love you. Why should they love you? How could they love you? Satan's not very nice at all. So let's go right off the bat to, and may I just say too, that Satan is very bold when he says, yeah, he'll curse you right to your face. And his wife tries to get him to do it. Anyway, let's go to verse 1 of chapter 2 now. So we're going to learn right off the bat that some time passes. We don't know exactly how much time, but some time passes since this happens. So Job, that's the thing. If something happens to you in a day, for that day you might be all right, but give us some time. Let that pain keep festering for a while. Let those problems keep staying and not going away for a while, and see how long you last. Satan didn't just stop at right there. He kept it up. He kept trying to hit Job with stuff. So Verse 1, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, from whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth and from walking up and down in it. So he's as arrogant as ever, isn't he? Uh, and the Lord, he isn't going to let Satan go that easy. Verse 3, and the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright one, a man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity, even though thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. God acknowledges this, that there was no logical reason, no fair moral reason to do what he did to Job there. God himself acknowledges that. And I just want to say here, too, that God, I imagine Satan must have been very mad when God said that, because it was the exact same words. Satan trying to act all proud, God once again, hitting him where it hurts the most. Satan answered the Lord, verse 4, and said, skin for skin. Yeah, all that a man hath will he give for his life. So, yeah, Lord, you've allowed him to stay healthy. I wanted to hurt him too with sickness, but you wouldn't let me do it. So, of course, God's not one to back down from a challenge. But put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, verse 5, and he will curse thee to thy face. So once again, Satan's throwing down the gauntlet. He's making a challenge to God once again. So God, of course, taking the challenge, says, and the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. Now, it sounds kind of cruel for me to say that, right? God took the challenge. Well, what about Job? Okay, great. God took the challenge, but he ain't the one suffering for the challenge. It's Job suffering. And God accounts for all of these things. He does. He isn't ignorant of Job and his situation. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So again, God's putting restrictions on Satan here. Satan is only allowed to go to a certain point when he tempts you, or any of us, anybody. And God will not allow him to go further than that point, ever. It's impossible. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And we know the rest of the story. Job goes through a lot. And again, being hit with something for a day is one thing, but to keep having to deal with it, for it to continue bothering you, for it to continue happening to you, day after day, week after week, month after month, that's a real problem. And Job, for the next 30 some odd chapters, gets told by his friends that he's a sinner. Well, Satan had great use for Job's friends because isn't that what Satan does? He loves to accuse. He loves to misrepresent, loves to do all these things. So Job has to deal with all that. He has to deal with his wife. He has to deal with all kinds of stuff here. But at the end of the story, of course, we know God makes it all worth Job's while. He doubles everything of Job's pretty much. 140 more years of life. Everything is just better because of all that. And Job has a better experience with God too. So it all ends well. So, and it will for all of us too, if we stick with God and don't doubt. So, I want to go now to Psalm 109, verse 6. Satan actually gets mentioned in the book of Psalms. I did not know that before preparing this sermon. And it's a very strong statement in the book of Psalms. Every so often, you get those in Psalms. Psalm 109. And I'm going to start with verse 3. So, first of all, this is a Psalm of David, according to what it says here. And David had a way of speaking his mind about things. He was very honest. And verse 3, they compassed me about also with words of hatred, and fought against me without a cause. For my love they are my adversaries, but I give myself unto prayer. And they have rewarded me evil for good, and hatred for my love. And then verse 6, set thou a wicked man over him, and let Satan stand at his right hand. So that's a pretty strong thing right there. I wouldn't want Satan standing at my right hand. I want him as far away from me as possible. Now, did you know that there is somebody in the Bible where they're described as having Satan at their right hand? And I'm going to show you where that person is at in the book of Zechariah, chapter 3. And this person was not a bad person from what we can understand. Zechariah, chapter 3, verses 1. And I'm going to quote a few verses here. Zechariah 3, starting at verse 1. Now, keep in mind for context, this happens after the exile. So, Zerubbabel and everybody is going back to Israel, and we're seeing a whole new batch of Israelites coming up to take the place of the old timers. And he shewed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. So this Joshua guy, who is the high priest, is being resisted by Satan standing at his right hand. And the Lord said unto Satan, verse 2, the Lord rebuked thee, O Satan, even the Lord that hath chosen Jerusalem rebuked thee. Is not this a brand plucked out of the fire? Now, I want to read verse 3. Verse 3 is very important, I think, for this too. Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and stood before the angel. So how many of us can say that we have filthy garments? We've had filthy garments, right? We've all had filthy garments. We've all sinned. We've all soiled ourselves, so to speak. But when we turn to God, this is how God advocates for us, right? We are a brand plucked out of the fire. We were in the fire. We were doing wrong, but we've been plucked out. God has redeemed us. So the reason why I brought this text in is because we see that Satan is an accuser. One of the main things he does is accuses. And he has the gall to tempt you to sin, and then right after he gets you to sin, he will accuse you. He will be the one to accuse you of the sin and go to God and say, look, Tony committed that sin just now. Did you see that? And he completely forgets the fact that he was the reason why I did it in that case. He did it. He's the bad guy here more than I am. And so it's very interesting to see how he works. But he is the accuser. He loves to accuse. And he loves to cause other people to accuse you too, if he can get them to do it, especially if it's your own brothers and sisters. Then he's really doing well. And we're going to see more of that as we go. But let's go now to the New Testament. And we can go to Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 10, where we talk about Jesus being tempted. There is a parallel account in Luke, but Matthew 4 and Luke are similar enough to where I won't go to Luke. So, Matthew 4, we go to the temptation of Jesus, and we learn a lot from Satan with this too. So, oh wow, already past 20 minutes into it. That's pretty crazy. All right. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. So, we learn a couple things here. There was I believe, based on what we're reading here, that there must have been a prearranged agreement between God and Satan that Satan would be allowed to tempt Jesus during that time. Based on the fact that it was all kind of scheduled. Everything was on schedule, if that makes sense. The Spirit drives him to the wilderness to be tempted. That was why he was to go there. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. Now, you'll notice this. Satan hasn't yet tempted Jesus, has he? 40 days have passed. That's a long time. That's over a month. And Satan has not yet made any attempt to try to tempt Jesus yet. So what does this tell us? Number one, it tells us that Satan is smart. He is not just out, going to randomly tempt you unless there's a logical reason to do so at that time. He's waiting for you to become weak and vulnerable. When you're strong, when you're conquering, when you're doing everything right, he isn't going to probably bother you too much there. Why would he? What's the point? It wouldn't do him any good to do it. Satan understands this better than any of us do. He's smarter than any of us. So he waits. He waits until you're at your very weakest moment, when you wish that you hadn't messed up. And then he comes to you and tries to hit you with everything he's got. Verse 3, yes. And when the tempter came to him, he said, if thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. I like that word, if. What is Satan doing here? He's trying to bring a question mark to this, isn't he? If you're the Son of God. Now, Satan does all the time with us, doesn't he? He wants us to question. He wants us to doubt. If we lack faith, guess what? The miracle won't happen. And that's just a biblical fact. If you doubt, you're not getting that miracle. That's just how it goes. When Jesus went to Nazareth to try to heal people, he couldn't do many mighty works there because of their unbelief, it says in the Bible. If you lack belief, there is a blockade there that is stopping God's blessing from doing what it's supposed to be doing for you. and that blockade has to be dealt with. That's why when I believe very strongly, that's why when we went into Sabbath school and went to the guy, the paraplegic, why first of all Jesus restores his faith by saying your sins are forgiven you before getting to the physical healing. Faith is crucial. Many, many times Jesus says, thy faith hath made thee whole. Many times. Faith is crucial. And that's the biggest thing Satan wants to go for is your faith. If he can get you to stop trusting in God, whether that be, God could never forgive me. Guess what? If you don't believe God can forgive you, Satan's got you right where he wants you. That is dangerous. You must repent of that lack of faith and trust God that he has forgiven you if you confess your sins and go to him in repentance. He has forgiven you. End of story. I don't care how you feel about it. If you say that God hasn't forgiven you after he has, you're making him a liar and falling for Satan's tricks. Don't do it to yourself. God has forgiven you if you have gone to him in repentance. So, and so it's always if. What if he didn't? No, and that's totally wrong, and that's of Satan. Verse 4, but he answered, Jesus answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. So, when, for Jesus, then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple. So he's in Jerusalem now. And saith unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down. For it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. This is interesting, because would the angels have done that? I'm not so sure. Because look at Jesus' answer. Verse 7, Jesus said unto him, it is written again, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And little aside here, snake handlers are tempting the Lord when they try to handle snakes like that. It's presumption. And then people make fun of them for getting killed by the rattlesnakes when it was them being presumptuous. They try to tempt God. Paul didn't do that when he got bit. He just happened to get bit by accident. Big difference. So presumption is very bad. And never be presumptuous. Verse 8, again, the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and sheweth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. If Satan can't get you to sin through his other methods, he'll bribe you, like he's doing to Jesus right now. He'll give you all kinds of good stuff. He'll make your life really nice. Verse 9, and saith unto him, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. So, Satan, it doesn't matter how he gets you, but he's going to try every method in the book to get you. He'll use prosperity. He'll use anti-prosperity. He'll use everything there is to use to try to get you to leave God, to try to get you to stop trusting in God, to stop trusting in him for your solutions to your problems. Very, very important tactic that we cannot be ignorant of. Now, let's go to John chapter 13, verse 27. This is a very interesting text. This is talking about Judas. Judas betrays Jesus. And 13:27, I went to 37. I'm just going to read it here. So, of course, Jesus, I'll go one verse before that, verse 26. Jesus answered, he it is to whom I shall give a sop, when I have dipped it. And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. And after the sop, Satan entered into him. Now, normally in the Bible, Satan isn't the one possessing somebody. It's usually a random devil, right? It's usually just a bunch of random rank and file demons that are possessing people. But this time, Satan himself is possessing somebody. He's possessing Judas. Now, Satan is very, very strategic in all these things. Why Judas? Well, for one thing, I think it would have been Peter if he could have had Peter. But Judas was the only one he was able to get. So he settled for Judas. But who better to betray Jesus than one of his best friends, one of his 12 disciples? If there's anybody Satan wants to go against Jesus, it would be his own followers. It was his own people who were with him. And that's what he does. He gets Judas, which is a huge prize for him. And it would have been Peter if he could have, but he wasn't able to get Peter to that level. But he got something almost as good. He managed to get Peter to deny him 3 times. And he really loved that too. So I guess what we're seeing with this is that Satan especially likes to target those who are in with God. Those are his prime targets. That and people in power too, but we can get to that at a different time. So, okay, I don't want to take too much time, but I've got a few more texts to go through. Let's go to Revelation chapter 12. And I'm going to try to be quick. And I actually also wanted to go to Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. I don't know if I'll have time for that. Those are the prequel stories of Satan, basically, if you want to call them that. I think we all know about those, so maybe I'll skip those this time and just go right to Revelation 12. And then I've got a bonus thing that I think is very interesting. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pained to be delivered. So, who's the woman? Who's the child? Right? Israel, God's people, the woman, and then child, Jesus Christ. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with the rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. So this is Jesus, and after the resurrection, he was caught up to the throne. Great. We're all caught up so far. Verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So when does she go into the wilderness? Around 500 AD, right? That's when the 1260 starts. We know that. So notice this now, verse 7. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. Now, there's actually a pretty significant debate in Christianity. When did this war happen? Well, I'm just going to tell you guys, based on what I'm reading here, this war happened after the cross, not before the cross. And that's very important, because people try to ask the question, well, how was Satan able to get into heaven in the book of Job when he is going before the sons of God and everything? And so some people try to say that meeting actually took place on earth. They're people. That's a whole different subject, but that's not the main point. Let me keep going. And prevailed not. So obviously they lost the war, which is logical. They should not win a war against an all-powerful God. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Now, in a later sermon, at a different time, I'm going to talk about how we overcome Satan, because there's a lot to that actually. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. They were martyrs. A lot of these people were. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Little aside thing here. You know, if you're kind of in this battle where you're trying to go to God, and Satan kind of has you, if Satan knows he's about to lose you, that's going to be when he fights the hardest to try to stop you from going to God over something. A good example of this is when there was that guy who was demon-possessed, and Jesus tells all the demons to get out of that guy, and before they leave, they just shake him, and he's just, and then he falls over as if he was dead. And so they fight the hardest right before they're totally cast out. Something to always remember about that. So, with that in mind, we can keep going to verse, 13. And when the dragon, let me catch myself back. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time, from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman. What does water symbolize? people. Satan uses people to try to get us. That's how he goes. That's how he works. That he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood with it, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. We believe that that's when the pilgrims came to the U.S. This would have been the earth. Get away from Europe, who's doing all the persecuting of the Christians. Verse 17 is the key text of what I wanted to bring up here. And the dragon was wroth with the woman. He was angry. He was furious, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Who does Satan hate the most? Who does he hate the most? It's these people right here. If you want Satan to hate you, then there's two things you do. You keep the commandments of God, and you have the testimony of Jesus Christ. You have both those things, and Satan will hate you. He will despise you, want you gone and dealt with, because you are a problem for him. He will do anything to get rid of all his problems. So, I wanted to go over Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. I don't think I'm going to have time. So, I wanted to bring a quote from Josephus. Now, changing gears a little bit. Satan, if we're talking about spiritual warfare, it's important to understand normal warfare, how normal warfare works. Very important, actually. I want to bring up a quote here. So, there are a few books Josephus is known for writing. There's one called The Jewish War. And this is a very interesting one because Josephus was eventually on Rome's side. He starts off on Israel's side, trying to stop Rome from conquering them. He changes scenes eventually, and because he knows it's pointless. There's no point fighting against Rome. But something very interesting here I want to bring up. So this is the Paul Meyer translation, not the William Whiston. This is very new school. I don't know where this would be in William Whiston's work, but in the Paul Meyer work, this is page 339 and paragraph 2. And in this part, he's talking about Jerusalem's situation while this was happening to them, while Rome was trying to besiege them and everything. So I'm going to read this here. If I had PowerPoint, I would be using it right now. I don't have it at the moment. The number of combatants and rebels in the city was as follows. Simon, son of Giora, had an army of 10,000, not counting his allies, the Idumeans, which numbered 5,000. So this Simon guy in Jerusalem, he was part of a sect in Jerusalem. He had 15,000 people. But something about Jerusalem is that they had a lot of civil war amongst themselves. So now let's talk about the other guy. John had 6,000 when he seized the temple, but these were now joined by 2,400 led by Eleazar and the Zealots. The factions soon relapsed into their former hostilities, and it was this party strife that subdued the city, which suffered nothing worse from the Romans than what the partisans inflicted on each other. In other words, what Josephus is saying here is that, yeah, Roman besieged Jerusalem, but that wasn't what got them. It was their own civil war that got them. What does Satan try to do more than anything else? He wants people in churches to fight each other. He loves civil war more than any other kind of war. If he can get us to go against each other, he can do so much more to us than if he's unable to do that. So, interestingly, too, if you read the history of how Jerusalem did against Rome, they did all right, actually. Obviously, they lost, but what if they hadn't have had all these civil wars going on while this was happening? Could they have beaten Rome? I don't know. I would doubt it, but at the same time, they could have done a lot better and maybe saved a lot more things from happening than what did happen. Now, why do I bring this up? Because Satan is at war with us. This is the great controversy. As Adventists, we all know this, right? But sometimes we know something without necessarily living it in our lives as a reality right now. And so we know there's a great controversy. We've been taught this. If you've been an Adventist your whole life, you've been taught this your whole life. We all know about this, right? Great controversy. But what is the great controversy? Why does it apply to us? Because we are part of that great controversy. Satan has declared war against us. We are part of that remnant, according to Revelation 12:17. We are part of the church which dares to try to live a life of obedience to God. We dare. And Satan hates that because If he could get everybody else to just disobey God, then guess what? 144,000, where are they going to come from? Because according to the Bible, those people have no guile in their mouths. They are a whole different class of people than what we typically see in churches today. And so if he can stop that from happening, then he might be able to extend his time. And another thing too, I say extend his time. A lot of us probably are aware of this, but it is a known fact that if we know Ellen White's writings, which I don't typically quote from much, if ever, but in her writings, it's very clear that Jesus would have already come by now if the Adventist Church hadn't have done certain things, such as rejecting the righteousness by faith message in 1888. That was a big problem. And I say that just to say that if that can prevent Jesus from coming, that gives Satan more time to do more stuff. And so I believe very strongly Satan wants to extend his time as much as he can. The more he can get us to squabble amongst each other, the more he can get us to go against God in what we do, the more he can do all that, the better his situation becomes. So, but that's for a different sermon to go into all those things. For right now, I'm going to conclude by saying that Satan, like Jesus says, loves to steal, kill, and destroy. Satan will accuse you all the time. And there are several things he can do to make shipwreck of you. If he can take your faith, you're done. Faith is the thing we're saved by. We are saved by faith. If he can cause you not to trust in God, he can take away, well, he can't take away your salvation, but you can by not trusting that God has forgiven you, be put in a very dangerous spot. That's the real battle. And if you mess up, okay, go to God. Get back up. It's not the end of the world. It's the end of the world if you give up. If you think that you are unsavable, then it's the end of the world. But if you believe that God cares about you enough to keep helping you, keep walking with you, then get back up. Trust God. Don't doubt. Don't let Satan beat you up. God has a great plan for each person in this room if they're willing to accept that. So I'm going to end it right there. I'm going to end the recording right here.